Hello, everyone. Yay, we are live and recording. I am excited because tonight we have Christian Cantrell in conversation with Tom Merritt. And now, from my perspective anyways, Tom is in the center and then Christian is on the opposite side. And we are here to celebrate Scorpion, which is just such a good title for a book. And the cover, I was just about to say, the cover is absolutely gorgeous. So I'm just like, oh, chef's kiss. And just to give you guys a little intro, Christian is a software engineer and author of Containment, Equinox, Kingmaker, and now Scorpio, as well as several short works of speculative fiction, 3 of which have been optioned for film or TV. And beyond his writing, he leads a team of designers and engineers who prototype the future of creativity at Adobe. So you're only mildly busy, is what I'm getting from that. Yeah. And then Tom is an award-winning independent tech podcaster and host of regular tech news and information shows. Tom hosts Sword and Laser, which is just such an awesome name for a podcast, a science fiction and fantasy podcast, and book club with Veronica Belmont. He also co-hosts daily tech news shows covering the most important tech issues of the day with the smartest minds in technology. He is the author of several sci-fi books, including PILOT X and TRIGOR, which also have really cool covers. Very different style from Scorpion, but still really cool covers as well that have just a great feel to them. Now, I'm going to let Christian tell you about his new book, but before I pass it off to Christian and Tom to discuss their new books, just a little bit on the house rules is that to the right-hand side, we have the chat section. Hello, Jordan. Thank you for the shout out and for a hello. So please make sure to say howdy in the chat section. And also, if you have any questions, I would highly encourage that you ask them. If you look down below, there's going to be a ask a question button, which, as that would imply, is indeed where you can ask a question. Ooh, Bethany Morrow. Hello, shout out to you, Bethany. Sorry, another author we've done events with. And hi. But if you have questions, make sure that you ask them down below. I always like to tell people the best part about events is that you get to interact, ask questions, pry the brain of the author, as you will. And then also, if you would like to purchase Scorpion or any of the other books mentioned, if you look down below, there is a magical green button that says purchase books, and that is where you can go and support Christian as well as Mysterious Galaxy and Tom. And on that note, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off. I will see you gentlemen at the end of the event. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Well, I mean, she kind of gave me clear instructions there. She said, start talking about the book. So,
what's this book about?
All right. So I'll start with a little bit of a foundation. So Scorpion, it's a near future thriller. And Tom, I'd be interested in hearing how you describe it too, because I think it's a book that sort of crosses genres. But I think of it as, I actually think of it as sort of 70% thriller, 30% science fiction. But it also is very much character driven. So I sort of think of it as this sort of vein of character that runs through both the thriller and the science fiction genres. It's about a woman named Quinn Mitchell, who's a data analyst for the CIA. And her job is to write queries against what are called in the book indices, which is data that's collected by intelligence agencies. And she is trying to, her job is to sort of uncover patterns to assist in various investigations. So it's sort of an office job. She's what I call a 9-to-5 spy, which means that she's part of the intelligence apparatus, the intelligence community during the day, and then in the evenings on weekends she goes home to her home in the suburbs of Washington D.C., which is where I live, by the way. And at the beginning of the novel, she is part of the Nuclear Terrorism Non-Proliferation Task Force, which has a mandate to recover unaccounted for fissile material before it can fall into the hands of terrorists. And the task force is in the process of being disbanded. They're sort of declaring victory. They sort of feel that they've done all they can do. And so every all the different team members are looking for new gigs in the CIA. At the same time that Interpol, the International Criminal Police Organization based in France, comes to the CIA asking for an analyst, if they can borrow an analyst, because they are chasing an assassin who they call the elite assassin. He's sort of gotten a nickname, and they are sort of stumped. So they need a new perspective. They need a fresh perspective. They can't find any commonalities between the bodies. Each of the victims has a 4-digit number, either carved or branded somewhere on them, but there's no correlation between the numbers, or it doesn't seem to be a pattern there. So they need somebody who specializes in patterns. So what Quinn had always thought was going to be this relatively quiet desk job in this cube turns into a field mission, and she finds herself chasing this elite assassin, this mysterious killer all over the world. At the same time, there's a third thread. There's another character named Henrietta Yee. She's a physicist. She's at the beginning of the book. She works at the Large Hadron Collider, and she's working on her thesis. As part of her thesis, she trains a machine learning model to start looking for patterns in this backlog of data at the LHC. So when the LHC runs an experiment, they only sort of analyze, sort of the top, sort of skim the top layer of data, the most interesting data, but it generates massive amounts of data, terabytes of data. They don't have the resources to process all that, so they store most of it, and they just analyze the most interesting. So Henrietta has this theory that there could be, a lot of interesting breakthroughs in physics to be gleaned from this backlog of data. So she trains an AI to go look for these patterns, and what she finds is a message hidden in this backlog of data generated, collected by the Large Hadron Collider through various experiments. So these three threads, which are seemingly very disparate, they end up converging throughout the novel in a very unexpected way.
Yeah, I think spy thriller would be the largest net you could catch Scorpion in, right? Because there are literal spies, and it's literally thrilling. So it's that's kind of the broad view, but it's also. And you had told me, you're like, there's a lot of technology in here, which isn't surprising, given what I know about you and what you do. There's a lot of technology in here. So I don't know if I'd call it a techno thriller exactly, but it's certainly a technology based thriller. There's a lot of what I admire about what Cory Doctorow does that you did in the sense of taking current technology that is either already possible or very close to possible, and then extrapolating what happens when it becomes common. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's much in here that you invented or stretched. This is all at least theoretically possible.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And by the way, I really love Cory Doctorow. And I do, really try to. I'm in the technology industry, and I watch this stuff very closely, as you do, Tom, obviously. And what I like to do is I like to sort of connect. I like to sort of plot, connect the dots, and then extend the line, right, and see where it's going. And that's what I like to write about. And the reason I do that is because I want the technology in the story to feel relatable. So I tend not to write about technology that feels really magical. So I stay away from nanotechnology. There's nothing wrong with nanotechnology. It's cool, I like nanotechnology, but I stay away from it because it's often used in such sort of a magical way where things are just sort of forming in ways we don't really get. And instead, I like to focus on, you're going to see AR technology, you're going to see AI and ML, which is, artificial intelligence and machine learning, blockchain technologies. You're going to see the next phase of augmented and virtual reality, right? Which is sort of goes a little bit beyond the technology we have now. But the other thing I like to do too is I also like to think about how I don't like it when storytellers just sort of assume that we're going to reach some moment in time when technology just magically always works. that's not the case. That will not. I'm sorry to spoil not the book, but I'm going to spoil the future here. That's not going to happen. Like, all of these devices are not just going to sort of magically start working together without bugs and everything. Things are going to always crash. Bugs are always going to appear, and I enjoy exploring that side of technology as well. So I try to keep it really grounded, and I hope that all the technology in the book is I hope it's interesting and inspiring, but still familiar.
Yeah, it feels very familiar. When you talk about the bugs and the experiences, instead of your phone not connecting, it's the glasses not connecting, right? You had one scene. I won't spoil too much here, but one scene with a very impressive, to me anyway, water resistance. That I would like to have in my own devices at some point. But yeah, there were a few times when I caught myself saying, oh, right, that I identify with this, but I identify with it by holding something rather than tapping something or having something connected or seeing it flat, whereas they're seeing it holographic. And it really did a great thing of making me feel not lost, but also feeling like I'm reading about the near future.
Yeah, and let me ask you this. Actually, I'm gonna turn the tables. I'm gonna ask you a question.
All right.
So I would not call this book hard science fiction. There is a lot of technology in the book, but I'm curious. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but sure. How would you characterize it?
Well, as I was reading it, I was thinking, wow, Christian put a lot more real technology in here than I put in my books. So this is way harder than mine. But at the same time, I think when people genre names are always problematic, right? Because one person's hard sci-fi is different than another's. But I think when people think hard sci-fi, they think a lot of theoretical underpinnings. They think a lot of really detailed, explain to me exactly how it works. And I think that's maybe what you're talking about is you're not going to go into the schematics and the inner workings. But I would say that, if it's not hard sci-fi, it's very firm sci-fi because everything is explained. Everything does work with everything else in a way that makes sense to somebody who does know technology. So I think it's you could wrap your knuckles against this sci-fi. It'll hold up.
Yeah, firm sci-fi. You just invented a new genre.
But yeah, I think that's one of the really not surprising, but one of the things that I found most enjoyable that I hadn't really thought about was just how deeply you painted that world. Is that drawn just from your own experience, or how much research did you say, you know what, I really need to figure out how this works before I can even explain it at the top level?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I'll give you a couple of answers to that. The first answer is that, in my in the software side of my career, I run a prototyping team. And so we are, very much looking toward the future. We're, very much thinking about the future of creativity, and that's going to involve AR and VR, and it's going to involve, blockchain technology and things like NFTs and, content authenticity. And we're looking at, AI and ML, right? Like that's very, very clearly going to be the future of creativity. I mean, there are obviously two sides to that coin, and maybe we can get into that at some point as well. But so I sort of, invent what I can at work, right? Like in my day job. But there are things that that we can't invent, we can't do, right? We're not going to write the code for it, or Adobe's not interested in it, or it's just, so I'm not content to sort of just let those things, just sort of evaporate. So I sometimes put them in books, and I don't put them in books to, in a gratuitous way, I hope, but it's, it isn't like I have a whole list of crazy ideas and then I look at how I can sort of assemble them into a book.
There wasn't at any point where I said that obviously is a failed prototype Christian threw in here.
Yeah.
Right?
Good. I'm glad that didn't occur to you. But I like to invent things. I like to invent and I like to create things. And one way I can do it is with software and with the team that I run at Adobe. And one way I can do it is writing fiction. But I always invent the technology that I use. Is always in service of something much greater than the technology itself, and that is putting characters in situations where they can be challenged in ways that they can grow, that they can end up going through their transformation, which is really what my books are ultimately about, is the transformation that the characters go through. And so, I want to put them in situations that they couldn't be in with today's science and today's technology, right? And I don't want to give anything away, but I hopefully that's sort of self-evident. Tom, hopefully, sort of understand what I'm saying there. Like they interact with some technology that sort of challenges them in ways that they couldn't otherwise be challenged. And so that's sort of ultimately, the purpose of the technology. But in terms of the research, I do a fair bit. I do way more research than ever kind of shows up in the book, right? So I'll learn. I'll read a whole bunch of stuff, and I'll get into a lot of detail, and I'll even write in a lot of detail. So what you don't see, Tom, is everything I cut. Yeah, sure. everything that the editors, said, I think this is good. You kind of got your point across. We can get rid of these 3 pages, because I do get into it, but I don't want it to slow the story down or to bog things down. But I want there to be an appreciation and interest. I want people to get excited. I want people to be inspired by the future. I think that's really important. The futures that I create, I really want to be inspirational. There's always 2 sides to it, and you see this in Scorpion, right? There's some dark sides to the technology, and that will always be the case. But I want to create. I want the technology to be inspiring, to be empowering, and so some of it I read about, and some of it is grounded in reality, and some of it starts in reality, and then maybe not so much. But hopefully people don't see those seams. They shouldn't see the seams. Everything should feel plausible. Yeah.
It feels to me like the technology that you use is not neutral, but a tool. Like you are definitely treating it like a tool, and the characters are changing around it. The technology doesn't change from good to evil. It's the people using it change why they're using it. I won't go too much farther into it, because that would just be telling your story. Go read it if you want to know what I mean by that. But you have a great story arc for multiple characters, where what they're using the technology for at the beginning is definitely not what they're using it for or why at the end.
Yeah. And I think, I have this saying that I use at work, which is, today's hacks are tomorrow's features, right? So when you, a good PM will always be looking at not the way necessarily, not just how people are using your product and technology, but how people are misusing it. And there's a great deal of creativity there, and you can learn a lot from that. And I have another saying, which is entertain the absurd. And what I mean by that is, before you put something out into the world, entertain sort of absurd uses of it, things that you would never think anyone would do. I mean, come on, no one's going to do that. Well, guess what? We've learned this by now, I think, right? I think that the optimism with which mostly Silicon Valley has put technology out into the world, I think there's a lot more cynicism there than there used to be, and rightfully so, right? So you can see in the book that there's a lot of technology that is empowering and is inspirational, but it's also, it also gets misused in ways that that entrepreneurs don't pay enough attention to.
Now, middle-aged Mike in our chat here used to work with analysts at the agency. Mike, you're really going to enjoy this. I'm curious how much of the spy culture, the CIA culture, the government culture, you were pulling from just people where you live, because you live in the Washington, D.C. area. Are you just kind of pulling from the atmosphere around you, or is that something where you also had to do some research and dig in to find out? Because I don't know that culture, but it certainly felt real to me.
Yeah, it's a combination of it is mostly pulled from people I know. So I live here in Northern Virginia. I grew up here in Northern Virginia, and I've lived various places. I've lived in Silicon Valley, in San Francisco for a few years, and I've lived in various places, but I've spent most of my time here. And I've always been surrounded by people who can't tell you what to do for a living, right? So you go to barbecues and you meet people at parties or whatever, and you say, what do you do? And I work for the government. Oh, got it. So move on. But sometimes I'll push them, right? And sometimes you'll be surprised at what people will. I mean, obviously they're not giving out top secret information, but they'll get into a little more detail, right? Mm-hmm. And I find those conversations really fun. There's a lot of people in the military, and by the way, there's a huge amount of information they can talk about, right? And part of it they can't talk about. Part of it is they assume you don't care. They assume that it bores you, and it doesn't bore me. It fascinates me. So I really get into it. This area was in the late 90s, which is right about the time I think that I probably met you. It was quite a long time ago. This area was really kind of the Silicon Valley of the East, and there was a lot of innovation, a lot of investment in this area, and then the terrorist attacks in 2001 really changed that, right? So a lot of the investment and a lot of the innovation in this area really started going towards intelligence and defense contracting. And the way I sometimes describe it is that we went from being known for being the headquarters of AOL to being the headquarters of Blackwater, mm-hmm. Right? And so that's really where this sort of idea of this 9 to 5 spy comes from. And but like what I like, the balance I tried to strike in Scorpion when it comes to this intelligence world is both, they're really incredible capability, right? I mean, and these indices, which is really sort of evocative of Edward Snowden, and this ability to collect all of this data and then to mine it and to write queries, and Quinn solves a lot of cases just sitting at her desk typing, which I think is quite interesting. But at the same time, there's also it's also the government, right? And it's also they're on a budget, and so there's this reality between the two, right? And I have, I know a lot of people who I've discussed this balance with, who are, who are maybe in the military or, even, command very expensive equipment. And I'm always super interested in like, well, how is this developed and who developed it and what was the bidding process like? And, and what's the, what are the politics, the office politics around, not the politics, but and there's some of that in the book too, which I think is interesting, right? Because there's, just like I want to tell both sides of the technology story, I also want to tell both sides of sort of like the intelligence story. I mean, yeah, they've got great tools at their disposal, but it's also still the government.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that you show well, it's almost its own side plot in a way, is the fact that we both overestimate and underestimate what the government can do all the time. And you see that with Quinn a lot, where she can do a lot, but there are limits. And some of the limits, like you said, are budgetary. Some of the limits are her own confidence and capabilities and all of that. And some of it is just nobody thought to do it. Right. There's a couple points where one of them realizes, wait, I can do this. But you didn't realize it. And it's a really good look into something we cover on Daily Tech News Show all the time, which is, yes, there's the potential and we need to guard against that. But then there's also the reality of what people can do with access to information. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about the government or Google or, dark web hackers or whatever. It doesn't make sense that people are either entirely incompetent or super powerful and can always do everything. And I think your story walks that line very realistically.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. That's sort of the same, balancing act that I want to, sort of play with all of this stuff. And, we see this with, this Colonial, Pipeline ransomware attack and this, sort of ransomware as a service. And, these kinds of companies are incredibly sophisticated in many ways, but in many ways they also aren't quite as sophisticated as they think they are. So like, yeah, they got the ransom and they were briefly in possession of a lot of Bitcoin, which later on they were not in possession of, right? Because they also are up against some other very talented adversaries. So it's, there's always both sides to these stories, and I really like telling those stories, right? I really like one of the things that really bothers me about some hero movies. I love a good superhero movie like everybody, but what I can't stand are superheroes that don't really seem to have any vulnerabilities, and they just sort of get bashed about for 120 minutes or something, and you're sort of like, well, what's the point? Like, why are you doing this? Because it seems as though they're invincible. Like, there's no point to this. And Iron Man is probably my favorite, because he's just, there's this sort of like inherent vulnerability that he has. He's taken the tech as far as he can, but the tech still has these limitations, which I love, telling both sides of those stories.
Yeah, when you're talking about the Colonial Pipeline attack, the folks that are at least thought to have been behind it and seem to have claimed responsibility, they lost all their Bitcoin, as you mentioned, even though they had gotten a lot, not just from Colonial Pipeline. And part of that was because they attracted attention with that attack. And I'm fascinated with, like, how did that happen? Was it a miscalculation on their part? Did they subcontract out their attacks, which they do, to the wrong person who overstepped their bounds? Was it a mistake? Because that can happen with ransomware, where it ends up in the wrong inbox and starts infecting the wrong target. And you now see them scrambling to go off and join other organizations and erase who they are, so that they can do this again, but without being identified by the government, because they attracted too much attention. You definitely take that sort of thing into account. The idea of you have this serial killer that you mentioned earlier, going around killing people, attracting attention, but also at the same time trying very hard not to attract attention, so that they can't figure out who it is.
Yeah, that's an interesting correlation. You're exactly right. And I think it's funny, when the pipeline got shut down, I think it was DarkSide is the name of the organization. Do I have that right? Yeah, you do. Is that what it is? Yeah, that's right. Okay. I think they were like, oops, like we didn't intend to go that far. This is a big problem. And they even apologized sort of publicly, and they sort of tried to walk it back a little bit and said, we're not trying to disrupt anything. We just wanted to get a bunch of Bitcoin. We really didn't want to shut down a pipeline. It seemed to be their attitude. It's all about the Bitcoin. Yeah. It was not an infrastructure hack, right? Infrastructure hack is a big deal. It borders on an act of war. It could be considered an act of war. Totally. Right. And so, that was a big mistake. And yes, you get a few million in Bitcoin for encrypting a few files here and there, and you might be okay. But you have several million in Bitcoin after you shut down fuel to the East Coast. And by the way, gas stations all around me ran out of fuel. You're up against, some of the best adversaries on the planet at that point. And then you see, okay, you know what? They're not quite as good as I think they are, because, all the Bitcoin's gone now. But you're right about the story, and this is really kind of, Renvir's challenge, right? The elite assassin's name is Renvir. And he knows that he lives in this is a surveillance state globally, right? Everywhere you go, he's, how does he, move around, and, maintain his anonymity while at the same time, really sort of, committing these sort of outrageous acts. And, he finds this sort of kind of like this bug in the system in a way. I never really thought about that until just now, where he finds this way where he can operate and do these things that are obviously drawing a ton of attention, and he can kind of just move through the system. And of course, Quinn's challenge is to figure out how to fix that bug. Yeah. I mean, it's the eternal story, right? You create a system, the hacker, whether they're malicious or not, figures out a way to subvert the system. Then the system creator patches that bug, and then the hacker finds something else. And also, I really want that frequent flyer program. Like, I do too. You know where I came up with that was so I kind of talked about the 9 to 5 spy part of the story, right? So like Quinn's background, I've talked about that. There's a this idea of this sort of the richest homeless man in the world. So this novel is based on a short story that I wrote called The Epic Index, and the first line of that story was Renvir is the richest homeless man in the world. And I came up with this because for a while, I said I live on the East Coast, but I work, for a company in Silicon Valley, and so I travel out there all the time, or I used to. And I went through a period where I was traveling constantly. I was going from hotel to hotel. I was doing some speaking, and I started thinking about what it would be like to, we generally think of people who are very wealthy as having homes all over the world, and I started wondering what it would be like to be so wealthy that you didn't have a home at all. You didn't need a home. What am I? I don't need a home. And you can just sort of stay in a city for as long as you like, and you enjoy the food, and you enjoy, getting the local culture, and then you sort of get a craving for a different kind of cuisine or something else, and so you just fly to another city and you just stay there as long as you like. So that's where I came up with this idea of this, and then I started asking myself, well, like, what would somebody like that do for a living, right? And so bringing these two ideas together, this 9-to-5 spy, this elite assassin, and we haven't talked about Henrietta, but there's a third element to all of this, who's this physicist named Henrietta Yee, who's very much a wild card in the story, and I'm going to be careful not to say too much, but these three dynamics which seem very disparate, and these three characters who you sort of see them at the beginning, and you think you kind of get it. You think you kind of get them. You're like, okay, well, I get it. Like, Wynn's a suburban, but all of the characters, undergo, even though they're on these very different trajectories and different backgrounds, undergo what I think is a significant transformation. And at the end of the story, everything is entirely different.
Yeah. The character arcs are really, really fascinating to me, such that after I'd finished reading it, when I cracked it back open earlier today and just looked at the prologue, I was shocked that the first two words of the prologue are Henrietta Yee. I'm like, oh, right, that was her. I mean, I knew it was her, but she goes so far from that point that I had forgotten the launch points. It's really fascinating, and she's a fascinating character because she's your youngest main character, right?
Yeah, she is.
So you get these grizzled veteran, rich homeless and suburban analyst, and then you got Henrietta Yee.
Yeah, and the prologue really tells the story of her, when she's even younger. She's working at the LHC, and then her discovery at the LHC really leads to to this big shift in her trajectory, right? And she has this backstory, where she's really on this very specific track, and then ends up on a very different track, I don't know. It's really hard to talk about Henrietta without giving anything away, so I have to be super careful. But I will say that that readers will probably think that they sort of get her pretty quickly. And be like, yeah, I get her. Like she's that person. And I'll just say, keep reading.
Yeah, I suspected there was more to her than met the eye, but did not suspect any of the reasons why. That's probably as much as I probably already said too much, but that's as much as I feel safe saying. We should probably take a look and see if we got some questions. It looks like we have a few building up in here. We've got a question from Mysterious Galaxy Bookstore. Since there is so much technology in this book, how did it challenge you in keeping the killer from getting found too quickly? And you sort of touched on this when you were talking about the surveillance earlier.
Yeah. Well, let me just say something very quickly about the questions. Please drop some questions in there, and let's switch into Q&A mode here. Tom, I'll just let you read them, but vote them up or ask your own questions. We got plenty of time here, so that'll be a lot of fun. Okay, so what I often do with stories is that I spend a lot of time outlining and writing treatments, and then I promptly abandon everything when I start actually writing the novel. So I go through this process of sort of like this process of discovery, right? Where I'm learning about, I'm thinking, I just need to live with these characters and these ideas in my brain for a while and then write about them. and I write this like very detailed outline, and I abandon the whole freaking thing, right? The outline is completely irrelevant. And the reason is that I want things to happen organically. And so sometimes the chapter will start and I think I know what the character is going to do. And then I find that they end up doing something very different, because I'll sort of see an opportunity at the same time they see this opportunity, and we'll be like, hey, like kind of together, wait a second, this could be more interesting. And I never shy away from that. I always lean into that, even if it invalidates what I thought would happen later, right? If it feels right at the moment, I go with it. And so the same is true when it comes to Renvir. I didn't necessarily always know how he was going to get out of every situation he was in. There are, and this is common in all of my novels, where I'll put characters in situations, and I trust that they will get out of them. I trust that they're resourceful, they're clever. I love to write about really creative, smart people. I mean, I just love to write about people who are able to synthesize things in really interesting and fun ways. And so there are some scenes where I put Renvir on a trajectory, and I put Quinn behind him, and I say, okay, you got to stay a step ahead. How are you going to do it? And I didn't always know. It was sort of a matter of knowing Renvir very well and knowing Quinn very well, and knowing what they have at their disposal, knowing what they know, and getting them to make, and watching them, sort of witnessing as they make these decisions. I don't know if this sounds really wacky or weird. It's the way I write, and I love it. It's tremendous fun. And I hope that comes through in the book. I hope that I have so much fun writing these books and spending time with these characters. And I hope that conveys to the reader.
Yeah. I will say there is a scene where Quinn appears to have been defeated, and she essentially uses file allocation tables to get herself out of it. And I was cheering. I was like, yes, smart. Good job. Jordan wants to ask, if you had to pick a character in Scorpion to be your backup in a fight, who would it be and why?
Oh, man. What a great question. Boy, they all would have unique strengths in different situations. I'm gonna say, right?
It depends on the fight. You don't want to bring a Henrietta Yee to a Renvir fight.
Yeah, it does. It depends on the fight, and it depends on this chapter and the stage in the book. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say, at some points it's going to be the different characters, and I have to be careful not to give anything away, but there's a transformation that goes on. The one thing I really like about Renvir, though, I will say, is that I really like his, I really like how calm and cool and focused he remains, right? I like how calculating he is. And, he's in these extremely stressful situations, and he's being asked to sometimes do some really horrible things. I mean, really horrible things. And but he stays focused, and he manages to do them. So I feel like having Renvir there to do the things that I couldn't bring myself to do. I don't know. I think depending on the fight, that might be a big advantage.
Bethany wants to know, if it doesn't constitute a spoiler, can you pick a favorite murder in Scorpion, whether from the writing experience or Renvir's method?
That's such a great question, Bethany. Bethany hosted our launch event last night. We had a wonderful conversation too. So thanks for coming today. I'm not going to say specifically because I don't want to give it away, but I like the first one a lot. Mm-hmm. And that was one where I didn't know how it was going to happen. I put someone in a situation where she's appeared to be invulnerable. And then I said, okay, how do you find an opening here? And then there's one that ends one of the parts of the book, which is also probably actually my favorite. And it's, I don't know, maybe it's demented of me to say, but it's such a transformational moment. It's such a moment that, without giving too much away, so the story's been optioned, and there was a lot of discussion with the screenwriter about this particular murder. A lot, like a lot of controversy around this murder, and I'll leave it there.
Yeah,
I'll leave it there.
Yeah. Be careful reading about that one, folks. Brace yourselves. I know it. I think pretty sure I know exactly which one you're talking about. I also like the one that I believe happens out here in California. How did you get such inventive murders?
That's probably maybe it's a little disconcerting. You know, I don't know. You know, really, what it is that I think about. You know, I don't sort of think about how I want the murder to happen and then build the sort of the characters and the situation and the scenario around it. I do the opposite. Like I said, I create the character in the scenario, and then I sort of have to figure it all out. And you might have to tweak something here and there, of course, right? It doesn't always it doesn't always work out. But sometimes, you know, sometimes it'll take me days to figure it out. Days, you know. So sometimes a day of writing for me, and I write every day, every single day. Every morning, 7 days a week. But sometimes a day of writing for me is going for a long walk, or Bethany last night was talking about, you know, sometimes her writing time is taking a nap, and that's actually a very meditative time. So sometimes I'll spend a few days where I don't touch the keyboard, but that's writing time, and it's this stuff that's working in the back of my mind, and then eventually it plays itself out.
So you're saying the characters are to blame for the murders, not you.
It's not me.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything.
Karen asked, how old were you when you first were exposed to computers, and what were they like then?
Okay, I'm going to date myself now. Well, I was 7 years old when I got my first computer. So that would have been, 1980. And it was a Columbia Data System IBM PC clone, the first one, I believe, the very first clone that IBM licensed. And my dad brought this thing home, and I believe he paid $4,000 for it back then. You know, back when I was 7 years old, that was a lot of. It's a lot of money now, and it's that was a lot of money back then. It didn't really do anything. So you really kind of had to know how to program. So I bought a book on basic programming, not basic programming, but programming the language BASIC, which was at the time, a higher level abstraction than writing in, machine code. And I just absolutely fell in love with it. It was, and I was a kid. Like when you're a kid and you get exposed to this stuff, like I think it might be like learning, sort of being bilingual or trilingual or speaking multiple languages. I don't think you question it as much, right? Like you just sort of, oh, well, that's the way you read the book and you go, that's the way the computer works. Okay, well, that's the way the computer works. You don't look at it and go, what? This is bizarre. You go with it. And so, instead of writing games like a normal kid, what I wrote was like creativity and productivity software. Like I wrote a word processor.
Nice.
and my family used it. My family would use this word processor, and I wrote, like a drawing application, and I made an ASCII-based Max Headroom clone. This wasn't when I was 7. Max Headroom came later, but that's something I did as well. So they were, there was something about computers back then which I loved, and that is that they really invited you into the process, into getting to know them. And of course, a lot of people hate that, and a lot of people don't like that. But now, you can be, I guess, more or less computer literate without really having any idea of how they work. And I'm glad that I first got my hands on a computer that required the user to know how it works, because that set my trajectory for the rest of my life. Yeah,
I think a lot of the problems we have with computers are a result of the disconnect between people who see computers the way you and I saw them, which was, oh, this is a thing you have to learn what it's capable of, and then you're responsible for making it do things. And the accessibility, which is great, that has come, especially with phones, where anybody can have one. but they're not necessarily going to take the time to figure out how to secure it, and keep in mind, what its vulnerabilities are, and understand that when it doesn't work, it's like, oh, well, there probably was, something misconfigured, et cetera. It's the difference between somebody who loves to work on a car and somebody who just wants to drive it to work. And we've transitioned with computers being now the things that everybody just wants to use for their work, and not have to tinker with, and not have to know how they work under the hood. And not all software and companies and business plans have caught up with that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I guess ultimately it's a good thing. But the thing that really drives me crazy though is the I feel like I'll just say something very, very briefly because I don't want to get off on a whole tangent here. But I feel like operating systems, instead of being this utility that they always used to be, like that's what they are to me. Instead, they're sort of like you install a new version of an operating system, and it's just this like sales pitch after sales pitch, trying to get you to sign up for things and activate things and put in a credit card and do all this stuff. And it's sort of a little bit, honestly, it's a little bit sad. Like it's a little bit of a shame that that's what computers are now to people. They're recurring payments, they're predictable revenue, they're and to me, you had to solve all those problems yourself, and it was just a utility, it was just a tool. And that's the way I still see technology.
Yeah, installing an operating system should just be waiting to switch out the floppy disk.
Good times.
Mark wants to know if you plan on writing more stories featuring these characters, which is something when you like characters in a book, you always want to spend more time with them.
Yeah. So the short story that Scorpion is based on, again, is called The Epic Index. This is a story that I wrote many years ago, and it ended with this huge cliffhanger, and everybody who read it always wanted to know, what comes next, and that moment is still in the novel, but writing the novel gave me a chance to expand beyond that, and to resolve that tension, right? It sort of builds up this, it's the end of part 2, for those who've read it. That's where the short story ended. It wasn't a short story, it was a very long story. I don't know why I call it a short story, but the novel ends also. Now there are a lot of plots, there are a lot of subplots, but there are a lot of arcs, but they all do get resolved, I think. Hopefully you'll agree. But it also ends with a new beginning, right? So yes, it ends, and yes, we see how all the arcs have been completed, but it ends with the suggestion of I think a very intriguing new beginning. So I would love to write more about it. So if there's demand, I will certainly write another story with these characters.
Excellent. That's good to hear. Because I won't say anything more, but there are definitely a few that I want to know what happens next. The way they are left with us, and then Constance was talking about the cover earlier. Can you and I think is asking here? Can you talk to us a little bit about the design and how it came to be?
Yeah, I love this cover. I actually wish that I could give you the name of the person who designed it, and I don't know because it was Random House. It was someone in the Random House art department. Oh, yeah. It may be in the book actually.
Jacket design by Tal Goretsky. Jacket images. Thank you. These are the Getty images. Julian Forniel. Author photographed by Ellie Cantrell. I just figured we should give all the.
That's my daughter. Yeah, my daughter took. My daughter took the picture in there, and she was so excited. It's my younger daughter, Ellie.
It's a good picture.
Yeah, thank you. That's that was taken last Thanksgiving. I love this cover. We went through, you go through a bunch of covers, right? And what I love about this cover, though, is really that I don't know how well it comes through, but there's this distortion in the middle, which is this spherical distortion. And that's very meaningful in the yes, yes, very well. Thank you, very well pointed out. And so I love it because it's just this suggestion of something. There's a different cover for the UK version, and I love that one as well. And I wish I could show it to you. I don't have one yet. The UK version's not out yet, so I don't have one. Sadly, I don't even have one of the US ones around me. Oddly, but the UK version is also very cool, and it has this graphic down the right side which looks like a sound wave, and that sound wave refers to a very specific thing in the book that has to do with Quinn's past and her daughter. There's a moment in the book that the artist who designed it that really stuck in their minds, and they decided to illustrate that. There's also a German version that has its own cover, and there'll be other versions too. And I think all the covers are fantastic, but I really love this one. I love the colors too.
And Bethany has another good question that I think goes right along with that. At what stage did you or the team decide Scorpion was the title?
Oh, that's a really good question. There was a lot of discussion about that. I wanted to call it the Epic Index because that's what the story was called, and I think that's a really cool term.
Yeah,
I think
it sounds like an intriguing title. Definitely.
Yeah, it sounds very intriguing. Yeah, exactly. The problem is nobody knows how to pronounce it. People don't, and this has happened. So the story before it was optioned to Fox, it was optioned a couple times, and so I had a lot of conversations with people about it over the years. The short story, before the novel, and without fail, every single person I spoke to said, well, I love the ep or epoch or wait, how do you pronounce it? Without fail, and they would ask me, well, how do you pronounce it? And I would say, well, I say epic, but epoch is also correct. And so we thought that was problematic. So we came up with another title. And when I say we, I mean, these were mostly my editors coming up with them. They were very, very good at this. I think I was too close to it. We thought about calling it Collider, actually, which is an interesting title because there's a reference to the Large Hadron Collider, right? But it also alludes to the trajectory that everybody's on, right? So this idea of this particle collider and these particles moving at near the speed of light and colliding into one another and causing these huge outbursts of energy and all of these sort of interesting patterns to study, that kind of pertains to the characters and the trajectories of the characters too. So we liked Collider, but it was one of those things that it's sort of like the Edge of Tomorrow. If you've seen that movie, it's such a weird, forgettable. It's a little bit forgettable. It's like
they actually remarketed it under Live, Die, Repeat, which sticks in my mind more than the Edge of Tomorrow. Usually, I was having to try to remember what's the actual title.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think it's a very good movie with a horrible title, and part of the reason it didn't do as well as it should have. Is because it had such a horrible title. So we felt that way about Collider, and then Scorpion. Someone dropped Scorpion. I think it was my editor Ben dropped it on the table, and we all just said, "That's it. That's it." And because there are very clear allusions. Like Scorpion was what it should have always been called, and I felt a little embarrassed that I didn't think about that. To be honest,
I'm actually surprised to hear it was ever called anything else, right? Because once you read it, you'll be like, "Oh, that's why it's called." Also, that's why. Also, that. Oh, well, of course it's called Scorpion, right? It echoes.
I shouldn't have missed that. It's the right title.
Well, it got there, so you have nothing to regret. I think we'll probably have time for one more question, given the scope of this one. Jordan wants to know, what do you both consider the greatest technological threat to the future of humanity? Bonus points if it's something we'd recognize from science fiction and fantasy novels.
I'm going to let you go first. I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think the greatest technological threat to the future of humanity is humanity. It's PEBCAC. It's that stands for problems exist between keyboard and chair. It's not that we develop something that we can't control or gets out of control. You hear a lot of legitimate, I think, worries that AI is not anywhere close to there yet, but taken to its logical conclusion, it could potentially eliminate us. I think we're the problem. And it is something we've gotten better and better at being able to do to ourselves, and so far have risked not doing it. But as we give ourselves more and more tools that have larger and larger effects, learning how to deal with them, taking the time to understand that things are new and that we need to take time to understand how they work before we can solve them. I think we often want to jump to the conclusion like, oh, this does that, so I'll do this to fix it. And occasionally what we think is the cure is worse than the disease. So being careful with technology and its use, I think, is what we have to do. And I think our overestimation of how much we understand the technology we're creating and how to deal with it is probably our biggest threat.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. And I'll build on that a little bit. I don't worry about artificial intelligence. I work with artificial intelligence a lot at Adobe, and I'm just interested in it, outside of Adobe as well. And I don't worry that we will lose control of artificial intelligence. I worry that we will gain ultimate control over it. I worry about it in the hands of humans. I don't worry about it in its own, sort of its own sentience or something, right? And I think that might even be in the book. I can't remember if it's in the book or not, but it was in the book. I can't remember if it got edited out or not. But this idea of, the scariest thing about artificial intelligence is not that we lose control; it's that we figure out how to control it. And there is another theme in the book which expands on that, which is this idea of a permanent global, permanent stable global totalitarian authoritarian regime. And it's always been the case that, like, that's been around forever, right? That threat, and we've seen it, in various manifestations throughout in different, throughout the globe. But there's something very, very scary about, combining this authoritarian, sort of gravitational pull that I sometimes feel is out there with the technology that's out there, and with specifically with AI and ML. There's something called shadow files in the book. Mm-hmm. And the shadow files are all of the data that gets leaked and gets stolen, or that we just simply give away without understanding the ramifications of it. Imagine if you take all of that data that's been leaked and that's been stolen, and you might as well just sort of assume it's everything that's really ever been on a network accessible computer. Because even if you take the breaches that we know about, it's horrible, and then imagine all the ones we don't know about. So, and if you take all that and you understand how to master it, you can query it. There's a technology called GPT-3 created by OpenAI, which is this very interactive way it's a language model that can make sense of massive amounts of information. So it used to be that information, there was so much information. We went through a period where we didn't have much data. And then we went through a period where we had too much data. We didn't know what to do with it. Well, we're now in an age where we have massive amounts of data, and we're figuring out how to do with it, what to do with it, how to query it. And those kinds of things are really scary, in my opinion. And in the novel, we see how criminals use it, and then we start to see some hints as to how not just criminals would use it, but maybe governments would use it, and that scares me tremendously.
All right, well, folks, if you haven't got the message yet, go get Scorpion. There's a button down there, right, Constance?
Yes, there's a green button that says purchase books, and that's where you can go and buy Scorpion, which I would highly, highly encourage all of you. And I know this is random, but I just have to share it. I don't know if either one of you have seen it, but Christian, this really made me think about what you were just touching on. There's a documentary about these programmers who created a computer that could beat the best Go player in the world. And do both of you know which one I'm talking about? Yeah.
Yeah, that's from OpenAI too.
Yeah, and it was fascinating to watch because you had like the one side of this amazing technological advance, but then you also had this other kind of sad side where you saw a little piece of a spirit of humanity broken by humanity that had also created that. Mm-hmm. And that what you were talking about just like automatically made me think of that. And like, because oh my gosh, like the ending scenes of that like documentary just like totally hit home for that. But back to Scorpion and the fact that you all should go out and read it if you haven't already. And just thank you so much to Christian and Tom for joining us. This was a beyond fascinating conversation. That was such a pleasure just to get to hear both of you talk about. And thank you for joining us. Thank you everyone for your questions and for putting questions and commenting in the comments. And we will see you all next time. And once again, Tom, Christian, thank you so very much for a very thought-provoking conversation. And we will see everyone on the next one. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.